Okay.
This event is part of the National Being Human Festival of the Humanities, which is taking place across the UK between 12th and the 22nd of November. Being Human is the only national festival of the humanities run by the School of Advanced Study, University of London, in partnership with the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the British Academy. Events are mostly online this year, and you can see the full programme online at beinghumanfestival.org. The festival can be found at Being Human Fest on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and the hashtag is BeingHuman2020. Now to Lisa.
I don't know whether you can hear this or see this. My video equipment doesn't seem to be working, but, well, I think I'm here. I'm in a cave. I think it's a cave. I'm not sure where, but I think I've travelled back in time to a different place. At a time long ago when our planet was called Earth instead of Anski. I can see some things in the cave. It's really dark, but I've got my torch. I think I can see some objects. Some things that might help us to find out what happened here. I'm looking forward to having a look. The only thing is, I'm not sure what's going to happen if I can't use my equipment. I'm not sure if I could even get back to Anski. I'm hoping this message gets to you, Dr. Roberts. I think you might need some help to get me back. I'm not scared. I'm not scared at all. But I hope that we can find a way to talk to each other. I'm going to have a look in the cave and see what else I can find. I hope this message gets to you. I hope you can find some helpers and that we can explore this place together.
Hello everyone, my name's Lisa Stevenson and I am a senior lecturer at Leeds Beckett University and I'm the director of the Storymakers Company. And I'm here as part of the Being Human Festival to introduce our second workshop. The first workshop was called Saving the Planet Anski, and that was an opportunity for you to get involved with our story, our online story that was created for children ages 7 to 12 years old during COVID. And the session this evening, the second session, is going to be the building of Planet Anski. So during tonight's session, we are going to speak to many of the artists and cultural organisations involved in the kind of the making of this online story experience for children. So before we hear from the artists, I'm going to invite Mel to introduce herself, and we're just going to think a little bit or talk a little bit about why we wanted to make this story in the first place. So I'll hand over to Mel to introduce herself.
Thanks, Lisa. My name's Melanie Hollis, and I'm one of the collections and learning curators at Colchester and Ipswich Museum Service. And I first got in touch with Lisa to talk about something actually very different, and here's where we've ended up, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. I think when we first spoke, Mel, you you contacted me because we both had a real interest in focusing on young people's voice. For me, it was in the context of the work that we do at Storymakers, which is using story to open up spaces for young people's voices, particularly with a focus on marginalised young people. We do that in a really kind of in an immersive way, often using drama and creative writing. And for you, it was something slightly different, wasn't it?
Yeah, for the last few years, I've been working with the World Cultures Collection at Ipswich Museum. And that's kind of led me to really think about me as a white curator in charge of a world collection and what my role is in terms of stories and voices. And I've sort of come to the conclusion that my role as the curator of that collection is to get out of the way and to make space for more stories and voices that are there. We've just left them out.
Brilliant. And I think that's what we were kind of, that we really had a very similar set of values there, didn't we, in terms of the importance of opening spaces for children to bring their lived experience to artifacts and stories, and to interpret them through their own worldview, if you like, and that being an important way, as you say, of not just decolonizing kind of the knowledges that we have in museums or in schools or in stories, but as a really important way of learning from and with each other. And I guess that was a key focus for the start of this story of saving Planet Anski. And we wanted to create a story experience for children during COVID, but we wanted it to be open-ended so that children could bring parts of their own experiences from being at home, whether that was kind of making artifacts and adding them to our story narrative, but also to interpret some of the museum artifacts that you've talked about through their own lens and their own way of seeing.
Definitely. And I think not only was the idea to let those voices shine through, but actually to let go of control of how the story happened. And that's a really different way of working for museums. Often we have, for school children especially, visiting as part of a school group, we'll have a very prescriptive session that has specific knowledge outcomes. And this was completely different. It was lovely and free in that sense, and flexible, which I think was really interesting to watch kind of evolve over the weeks.
Absolutely, and I think that is something that we're going to hear about through this session this evening, that from the artist, that idea of using a story structure that was flexible, but actually the idea of letting go of control, even when we thought we were being flexible, was something that came up for everybody in different ways. And I think this evening some people will talk about their experiences of that through an academic lens, some people will talk about it through their practice particularly, or through a particular moment, or they might talk about it as somebody who participated in the story. So that's the kind of one of the key things that we wanted to sort of draw on this evening, the importance of young voice, and that is at the heart of both our work and what we do. I'm wondering if you could just say a few words, Mel. You kindly ran the session, the previous session to this one, which was Saving Planet Anski, and that we wanted that to be an opportunity for people to experience our the online story that we created, that ran across 3 landscapes. A wasteland, a cave, a wasteland, and then a future eco-planet. We wanted everyone to have the opportunity to engage, because it is an immersive story experience where we're encouraging people involved to be in dialogue with each other and to create and make things and to share them and to respond to them. And that was one of the aims of the project, that it would connect people at a time, perhaps during COVID, when we're feeling disconnected. So that was our session 1. Could you just sort of have a little bit of a brief summary of that, of how people engaged with the online story during the session?
Yeah, and it was actually very, very different to how we'd set it up in the Padlet, which obviously was meant to last a few weeks. And we had an hour, I think. So we started off just by introducing the kind of the call out, so a couple of the videos that are part of the story adventure. We used those to kind of start off a conversation, and then I just kind of talked through a couple of the characters, a couple of the things that the children might expect to find there, some of the challenges they might face, or the activities they'd be invited to do. And what was after we'd got over the initial not sure if anyone should be talking or not, actually by using that questioning technique that is employed in the Padlet adventure, and something we do regularly at the museums, it kind of warmed people up. And once they'd got the hang of the fact that they were meant to respond in some way, that really took off then. And it was quite exciting to see the reactions come in when some of the characters popped up or some of the objects appeared on the screen. It was nice to see that in real time.
Brilliant. And I think that you've just touched on a few sort of core elements there of the story, that we wanted to position children within that story as having a really important job to do. And we used different characters and different artistic techniques, like teacher in role, to invite them to become, we called them story rebels. And that it's great to hear that participants really, there was once they'd allowed themselves to become the story rebels, and sometimes we need permission to do that, don't we, that actually there was a real sense of excitement and investment in the story. I think you even mentioned that there were whoops of excitement at certain parts of their story experience, which is great to hear that, because obviously when it was just online and we just sent this out for families who were obviously in lockdown, although there was elements of the story that were immersive, and we were using questioning techniques to try and really explore the story in more detail. Like you said, we didn't get that in real time, so it was great that you could really feel the effects, if you like, of the story, which is what we wanted. Yes, so it was great that people had the opportunity to participate. If you didn't, and you're at this festival and you're interested in participating in our story, do follow us on Storymakers, at Storymakers Company, at Storymakers Co as well on Twitter. And I'm sure that there'll be various times when we are releasing part of the story for you to be immersed into it. And there are lots of testimonies from artists and further information about the story on our website. But what we're going to do now, I think, Mel, shall we hand over to the artists for the second part of this session? The first part being the actually immersing yourself in the story, but to hear from other people involved and some of the challenges for their own practices and some of the ways of working that they found particularly interesting, because this is a first kind of story of its kind in a way. We've used online practices, offline practices, artifacts, as we've said, from museums, and at the heart of that, the ethos, as Mel and I said, was about space for young people's voice at a challenging time. You know, an exciting and aspirational adventure, a living inquiry, absolutely a living inquiry for them, and a living inquiry into the times. So we're going to see the following conversations with artists as a living inquiry as well. So the idea again is it's quite conversational, and people are just critically reflecting on things that they found interesting or poignant about the making of our story. In fact, we're calling it a story weave. I think it's the first kind of online offline blended story experience that's been created in this way. And as you've started to hear, it's a weave when you're experiencing it, because you're experiencing different fragments of stories, you're interacting with people online and offline, and it's also a weave in terms of the way that we've tried to layer it up to create an aspirational and exciting and hopeful experience for young people. And I think moving through the story, again, you know, we do start in the cave, which is a fairly dark space, but we do move to a future planet that is a planet that's really looked after. Anski is the planet. And so part of this story, we hope, is an eco story as well, and children have the opportunity to take what they've learned from the story and create a sort of future eco museum in response to that. So, so that was part of our inquiry and their inquiry. So we'll hand over to the artist. The first artist, he's going to talk about his experience of being a character in the story, is Alistair Daniels. And I'll hand over to Alistair to start our living inquiry.
There you are. I was muted all that time. Forgot all about that. And here I am. I'm Alistair Daniel from the University of Roehampton, where I am the principal lecturer in primary English education. But I'm also a storyteller and drama practitioner. And one of the things Lisa asked us to do was to establish who we are. So I just put some images up to show what the kind of practice that I engage in. And in the middle there, you've got a puppet, and for me that's quite core to what I do, is the way that we can make objects be other than they are, be something else. That's actually an old cushion, some net curtains from Oxfam and some wool that becomes Titania because of the way that I treat it within the storytelling that I'm doing with the children. So the way that we can change the world around us by how we treat it, by how we relate it in how we place it within narrative, is an area that I am really interested in. And so a bit more of the kind of work that I do, so working with mask and the way that we transform, and drama as an as-if behavior, that when we act in role, we behave as if we are someone else, somewhere else, or at another time, and the masks enable us to do that. And again, there's the puppetry. And also on the bottom left, just storytelling in the woods. And by using storytelling in the woods, transforming the woods the children were in through the process of narrating that space. This is a quote from a very recent work. Engages students not as disembodied thinking machines, but as emotional and bodily creatures capable of imagining as well as reasoning. Now, I completely agree with DeCourcy, and I'm sure Lisa, as a drama specialist, would echo what's being said here. A bit presumptuous of me to say that, Lisa, but I hope you don't mind. But I want to extend that and say that actually we need to pull that beyond drama to cognition engages our bodies. We are emotional and we are bodily creatures. When we narrate, when we talk of ourselves, when we talk of others, when we explain the world, we are essentially thinking of we are being bodily creatures who have an emotional response and connection with the world around us and with each other and with the events in that world as well. So I'm thinking in terms of this idea of embodied story making, and the bit I haven't addressed is that dialogic part, that actually this is meaning making with other people. So it's storytelling in the woods with the children and co-constructing story with the children to transform the woods, co-constructing dramatic situations with students and with children. And it's something that we make together and is negotiated rather than me imposing something upon them, or at least that's my hope anyway. So it's about meaning making and possibility thinking. It's also about being and doing, that as-ifness, the being part of it, and then the enaction that comes through that, and the cognition, the thought processes that come through that enable us to transform space and time. And what I haven't put there, of course, is to transform ourselves as well. So how was my usual way of working challenged, was one of the first question after introducing who I was part. And we have been, before the meeting actually started, before we started this recording of the session and everything, we were having a little chat about the difficulty of dialogue when you are separated by space and time. that when you're used to working with people where somebody says something and you go, oh, let's go with that idea. I hadn't thought of that. Let's do that and try something new. It's hard to do that when you're presenting something, as I was doing in this work, as a video extract or a 3 or 4 minute video that then it goes out there, and I have no chance then to take it back and change it and alter what I've said and what I've done to reflect what the children are saying. It's a sort of just putting it there and leaving them to make what they will of it. And the dialogue that then occurs around it has I have no means of changing that initial stimulus. Obviously the children then can dialogue with each other as they respond to it, and I could dialogue with them online a little bit as well. So that was that nature of being separated and not being able to have an instant and embodied dialogue was quite challenging for me in my work. So what was interesting for me as an artist, so I already talked about transforming worlds and using objects and place and transforming place and objects. So I thought about this working from the left, the idea of negotiating worlds, that we have a story world, which is the Anski world that's been created online. And then the children obviously exist, and so do I, within a physical world. And if we just follow the line from the physical world, they've got the home context in lockdown Britain. That's the reality that they were in. And that physical world also enabled them to engage through technology. Now, the story world was conceived by the leaders and artist practitioners, but then it was manipulated by the children. So we have those two threads, and what I haven't represented here is the way that they interwove more than just being parallel lines there. And from the story world, as we take the artist practitioner's idea and the physical world, bringing these things together, we end up with what I came up with, that phrase of a bricolage world of fragmentary narratives. That deserves to be a paper, if anything does. Mm-hmm. The idea that we've constructed a world of stories, of bits of story, fragments of story. Sometimes they're nothing more than a sentence or an exclamation that the children have engaged with online, that you don't see something that's complete. What you see is something that we could see within the overall story, and in a sense takes each little intervention had the potential to take it in a different direction, but they are fragmentary, and we're not seeing a coherent whole in that sense, which again is challenging for a storyteller to think about. And so that critically to reflect upon that nature of fragmentary stories and how children, well, how people often engage in little snippets of story and building stories together with incomplete statements, incomplete sentences, single words, and yet we manage to understand and create a coherent, a semi-coherent world, that bricolage world around us. And children are doing this all the time with each other in the playground, as they're working together in the classroom, as they're playing together outside of school. And so this project sort of embraced that and encouraged that, and it's for us to now think about what that actually means in terms of children's learning and children's responses and the opportunities it presents to children. And if you're interested, I've got a website, storytent.co.uk. Sorry, I've probably talked a lot longer than you thought I was going to. I apologise.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Alistair, and welcome to guests who have joined us. Just to recap, if you joined late, my name's Lisa Stevenson, and I'm the director of Storymakers Company. I don't think I said that at the beginning, and no, I didn't, so I'm saying it now. And this is we're treating this session, if you like, as an inquiry for the artist involved in the Reimagining Home project. We hope that you had the opportunity, you've had an opportunity to look at our online story that was created for children in COVID. It ran over a 3-week period, and essentially what we were encouraging was a sense of playfulness, risk-taking and discovery online. And between us, between a set of 8 artists, we were thinking about how we might bring parts of the story alive through the use of characters and we're just hearing from some of the artists now, in a sense. I guess the overall aim for the story was to create a space where children could both escape from reality if they wanted to, but also could bring part of their lived experience. And I mentioned at the beginning of this session that we wanted to create, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, but we wanted to create, if you like, an emotional landscape. So we used the setting of a cave, a wasteland, and then a future eco-planet, and our story unfolded across those different settings, with each of the artists here providing sort of rich storylines and pop-up explorations within each of those settings for children to engage with. Sometimes they were online making things, sometimes they went away and they were creating and making in their home spaces and bringing those stories, those bits of story back online. So as Alistair mentioned, it was a real bricolage. I think that's a really interesting, we've talked about that a lot, and it was a very different way of working for a lot of us. So again, just to recap for those coming in, you're very welcome to the session, but this is kind of a freestyle of us just really reflecting on that and how our practice worked within it, how it didn't work, and what it's made us think about. And we invite you to just add any questions to respond at the end of our inquiry, as we're calling it, when we've heard from everybody, in terms of any questions that you have, or perhaps any way it resonates with your own practice. And this is an ongoing inquiry that we think will as we kind of revisit this story and it takes different manifestations, that it will move and develop as it progresses, really. It's certainly the first kind of story that's been done like this, I think, where we've got bits of online 360 degrees technology. We can see in front of us that wonderful picture there, building Anski. Was an image created by Interplay Theatre for the final setting, but equally, there's lots of other stimulus within this story, kind of mashup, if you like, bricolage. So thanks, Alistair, and really interesting to hear your reflections on that and some of the challenges and also things to think about, and we'll come back to those. I'm going to invite now, if we just move from Alistair, to invite one of our other really important artists, cultural organisations, to invite Mel from Colchester and Ipswich Museums, just to talk about a little bit about the story from experience from her perspective and the way that the museum was engaged.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm a collections and learning curator at the museum service, and I have the absolute privilege of looking after thousands of stories and the job of bringing them to life. So our usual way of working, as you can imagine, is in real buildings with real people and real objects, and we're there to facilitate dialogue and discussion and discovery. But obviously that was interrupted by the pandemic, and so I wanted to explore two connected things by taking part in the project. And the first was around storytelling, in the sense that we've been doing a lot of thinking lately about the stories we tell, who tells them, and how we tell them. And we've been exploring how we can share the power museums have as storytellers. So that was of interest to us in that sense. And secondly, we were really interested in supporting problem solving and creative thinking, and exploring how the museum collections can be used in actually what was a supporting role. So I wanted to see how the children made use of the objects within a broader experience than has traditionally been the case in museums, I would say, but without limiting their imaginations, by giving them information about the objects. So it was quite a free flow resource for them to use within the story settings.
Fantastic. And I know we've got somebody here who I'm going to invite, Jason, who was a participant, who's a participant. Hi, Jason. So you actually were in disguise as a story rebel you were playing the immersed in the story as a player, if you like, or as a participant. And I know that you kind of had some responses to the artifacts as well, which was a really big part. In each setting, artifacts were placed for the children to explore. So I'm thinking in the cave in the first setting, it was littered with artifacts from the museum that could be interpreted, as Mel said, in any way that children wanted. So we wanted this really sort of free, imaginative experience. And so how did you respond to that and to the artifacts?
Yeah, hi there, Lisa. I was happy to sort of to have something to do during sort of lockdown, and I wear lots of different hats. So to introduce myself, like, first of all, I wear so many different hats, but for the purpose of tonight, the two hats I would wear is teacher. So I'm a primary school sort of teacher, and also a researcher. So in this, what I found sort of really interesting with sort of Mel, and again, that's the thing where there was a video clip of herself introducing sort of, you know, the artifacts and sort of the idea of sort of discovery, and then throughout sort of the site, in the section of the cave as you've described, there were prompts given, sort of artifacts given, and one of the sort of the prompts, if I sort of get this here, was I've got some notes to myself. Is yeah, here we go. This is tricky doing. It was this. Now, interestingly, what I've had to do is I've had to print it out. So it's kind of interesting. I've had to print it out, and I've had to cut it out so I can hold it in my hand. And so even though this is a digital experience, I've still used ink. I was still sort of printed, and yeah. And so it's just because when something's in your hand, the words seem to flow more. So this artifact here, it's interesting because the great thing was, as a teacher, I wanted to engage with the children. I thought, oh, I'm a teacher in disguise. So my pseudonym was Silver Scholar, you know. So that was the name I gave myself. And anyway, as a researcher, what's really interesting is that you're able to look back on what the children, I'm looking at notes now, and what the children sort of typed. So like a transcript. So here we've got this artifact. So here, and if you look really closely, you'll see some detail. I know. So I have this one, and so yeah. Just the point with this is, if I read this here, it's got sort of one character who says, "This reminds me of." Oh, it looks a bit like a Viking's weapon, and then there's this. From someone else. I think it was a knife of some sort from someone completely different. Maybe a tool for harvesting crops. And then there's one of us, a Story Rebel HQ. Very interesting. What kinds of crops would they grow in old earth? Do you think that any survive? So they're like the prompting there of, and I'm thinking, oh, I'll prompt as well. What do you think the numbers on the blade mean? So, so when you're getting here, and it's this dialogue of, well, it could be, it might, oh, is it a tool? Maybe the numbers are a code. And I'm there going, oh, a code, great idea. A code for what? And then someone's thinking, no, I'm not really interested in that. It's a scythe. It looks like a scythe, or maybe a hoe or an axe. So I'm ignoring your prompt. I'm going with my thought. It's an axe. And I thought that was like wonderful in that. So even as the teacher in disguise, I'm thinking, oh, I'll prompt and I'll maybe sort of get them to think about the detail. If they really wanted that ownership of where that artifact was going to go, it was there, it was typed, you couldn't delete it. it was there. So I thought that was really interesting.
Really interesting a way the dialogue flowed online. I mean, we used Padlet within this story, because one of the things that we're really keen to do when we provided the story stimulus is create a dialogue between children. So children were uploading, and as I say, and took pseudonames, and you were the Silver Scholar kind of, so questions, which is fantastic. But really interesting how that dialogue flowed between children as well, naturally from the object. And that they were kind of, as Mel, exactly as you wanted, Mel, you very much, you spoke about wanting to allow that free sense of imaginative inquiry. You wanted some kind of inquiry there from an artifact. And it's interesting there that for that moment, and when we look back on the plaid, that we could see that children were doing that and were interpreting the artifacts in their own ways between them.
Yeah, that was one of the things I enjoyed the most about it, actually watching that unfold. And I could have easily kind of slipped in stealth mode as another character to kind of put more prompts in, but really didn't trust myself to not ask them to get to a point, because as a museum educator, what you're often ultimately trying to get them to do is guess the right answer, because you're trying to get them to acquire historical knowledge, or, you know, comparing and contrasting and all those sorts of skills. But actually that wasn't what we wanted at all. So it was really lovely to see that, like you say, those imaginations coming to life.
Brilliant. And that really resonates with what Alistair was saying as well, that kind of bricolage, and something that we talked about very much as a team afterwards, that, you know, we did have this sense of, even through our own artist practice, wanting to get children to a certain point, or to, even though we think that our practice is actually quite open-ended normally, but we really didn't have control over that when it was online. So we had to sort of go away and come back. And I think that Alistair and Vicky Sork of Chol Theatre, who isn't here, couldn't be here this evening, but we were talking about that, and we very much, you know, I think it was either Vicky or Alice that said, does it matter actually? You know, and so one of the things we were thinking about is how can we value those fragmented sense of story? And actually children were inquiring on their own, on and off screen, and there is evidence of that in different places. So it's really interesting that even though you're from a cultural setting, we're all from different artistic practices or different settings, that was one common thing that we kept coming back to, wasn't it? Was there anything else in terms of the artifacts that delighted you or surprised you in terms of the way children interpret them in an online space? Because it is very different. They were placed into this sort of very open-ended story setting that essentially was just you know, 3 settings and characters. Myself as somebody who they were looking to get back to, had travelled back in time, as we saw from the opening of this session, who they were looking to get back to their home planet. But other than that, the whole story was about exploring these settings. So any other because you had artifacts in each setting, I don't know, just is there any other responses to the artifacts that surprised you or delighted you?
Oh, all of them did. But it was really, what was really interesting is that some of the objects, they recognized something similar and were referring to, like, popular culture and films and telly, because they'd seen that somewhere else and were making those links, which was really lovely. The skin coat was amazing. I think it was partly down to bad photography, but the story that unfolded from that was amazing. Jason might have something to add on that point.
Well, what I was going to say is that in the same way I've just sort of shown the dagger or the scythe, what it is that I noticed at the beginning, you know, sort of the beginning sort of the story weave, that yeah, just like you said, is that in a way something was shown, and there's a little bit of homeschooling sort of mindset in that, oh, I think that's like when we studied the Egyptians or the Celts, or, you know. But what I would say is, as the story, as the project, you know, the story's adventure progressed, The interesting thing was, because of the modeling from sort of, you know, sort of the adults in role, being really creative with everyday objects, but then sort of explaining that they were something else, that imaginative substitution, then it's like they thought, oh, I'm allowed to actually go with what I think, not what they think it really, so not what they're expecting me to perhaps know from what I've studied. So I think that adult modelling of almost being, I put here, the playful inquiry, meant that it was the permission. You know, it's like the permission to go, okay, I'll go for it. There's no rules as such.
I think that applied to the adults too, if we're honest. That permission to play, that delighted me.
And I think we had a lot of fun, didn't we? I mean, it was messy, but thinking about how we would bring our own practice in the story and somehow make it a cohesive landscape for children to explore. It needed to have some kind of through line, which I'm going to talk about, which was the use of teacher in role, which I then, I reframed it. I was lucky enough to work with Harold Roberts in doing that. And in terms of reflection on my own artistic practice, I'll come to that. But we had this framing, but other than that, we had these landscapes littered with past characters. And we're going to talk about Alistair's character, one of Alistair's characters, I think, in a bit. And Vicky from Troll Theatre was a character, Annie with her dog Marv. I'm going to talk about her character later, but it was littered with characters that might give us clues about what had happened in these settings, because essentially the story was about finding out what had happened in the past. You know, as we saw from the opening trailer, a long time ago when our planet was called Earth. So it was, the story was, you know, was set in the past, if you like, to start off with. So that's really interesting, Mel, and really great to hear about how you worked in different ways. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the objects that you placed in each setting? Because I think they were quite different depending on the mood of the setting. Well, we've mentioned we had the cave, then the wasteland, and then the future planet. Yeah,
so again, we're really privileged in that we had access to a really wide range of objects across the collections. And I was really very conscious when we picked which ones would go in which setting, not to kind of primitivize certain objects and cultures and peoples. So that's part of the work I'm doing outside of this project. But to be able to draw from archaeology collections, from our natural history collections and from our human history collections meant that there really was this realistic kind of resource for the kids to use. So the cave, I think, had lots of man-made objects that humans have used. I think the oldest one, I don't think we put a Stone Age hand axe in the end. So the oldest one wasn't 250,000 years old. But we had Roman things in that setting right up to present day. I think we had a stopwatch and a lantern in there, as well as some other objects. And then moving out into the wasteland, I think we looked more at belongings and objects that were about emotional attachment to people. So I think we had a locket with an image in it, and a toy as well. They were a couple of the things in the wasteland setting. And then in the final setting, kind of going towards this sense of hope and back to where we'd come from within this game, we really drew on the natural history collections for that. And so that was about the diversity of this lovely lush planet, and species and animals that they could find there, that they were kind of encouraging to survive and thrive.
Fantastic, brilliant, and great, thanks, Mel. So I think, I'll move on to, did anybody else have any other sort of responses to that? Because we were just freestyling this, aren't we? Alistair?
Yeah, I actually, something that just came up when Jason was handling about the printing something out, and the way that being able to move in relation to the object, and then the desire to have something to touch relates to, for me, the role of gesture in cognition. And that actually, you know, we sometimes think about when we're, particularly when we're doing drama, you know, oh, your gestures have to reflect your thinking, as opposed to your gestures are part of your thinking. Your touch is part of your thinking. I mean, this is why we have electronic devices with haptic responses, so that we actually feel a response from something. And I just thought Jason's response of needing to print out something that was online was really interesting. And how powerful it was when the children made their own dens, because that was physical. They changed their space, they changed how they were, they changed their posture, their way of being, their way of doing in response to that. So in a way, I'm sort of doing myself out of a job here in terms of virtual storytelling, but it's such a complex interweaving there.
Absolutely. And we talked about, we described the story this story, what we've made, if you like, this experience as a story weave, because one of the things right at the beginning that we were really keen to do was to have, as we said, moments online but offline as well, where children were physically making. And that was for a number of reasons. It was because we wanted not to exclude children who perhaps didn't have access to a lot of computers. But also we wanted this story to also be a story about a positive story about hopeful futures, and we wanted that underpinning sense of stressing the importance of creativity, thinking outside the box, possibility thinking, whether that was you know, using artifacts in your home. I was in a cave, I am still in the cave, but we were using everyday objects to tell stories, and we'll come to that. But we wanted to have this sense of, you know, of everyday creativity being a part of the story as well. So children could, and also if children didn't have access to green spaces, that they could look out of a window and they could be part of the story by using some wooden spoons in the kitchen drawer, for example. So we'll come to that. That's great. So thanks, Mel. So we've heard from Mel. We've heard a little bit from Jason, who we know as a teacher was also in role as somebody playing the game alongside the children. We've heard a bit from Alistair as well, not so much about his role. We're going to come back to that in a minute, his story role, but also about some of the kind of the theoretical framing around the story, the online and the offline story. So I'm just going to sort of talk a little bit about, from my perspective as an artist, a little bit about what I was trying to think about in the same way that everybody else has responded. And I've mentioned that initially we wanted to create a story with a sense of playfulness and risk-taking and discovery. And I talked very much with Howell Roberts initially about how we might do that using teacher in role. So how could we use teacher in role, and we specifically wanted to use that to position children, to place children in a position of power where they had some agency or some control and an important job to do. So we came up with this rather kind of outlandish narrative, if you like, that we were two researchers, and our job, if you like, as teachers in roles, was to study artifacts from our planet, a future planet called Anski. And somehow we had managed to secretly discover a way to travel back in time. And during that, during a time when we were exploring time travel, I had become stuck in the past. And that's where our story starts. And we started this session today with that opening trailer. You saw that I had arrived somewhere. I didn't know where I was. I thought it was a cave. And again, that little clip of teacher in role was done under my kitchen table in my kitchen with a blanket over my head. And we talked very much, Howell and I, about purposely using that, you know, not making it something polished, really thinking about being playful and having that suspension of disbelief. And if I could be in a cave underneath my kitchen table, a child could be in their cave, wherever they wanted to be. And Mel's picked up on that sense of playfulness, that we were all part of that. And so that's where the story began. And I will just mention again, some artists who aren't here. Behind me, you'll see a virtual reality kind of design of the cave. And behind Alistair, the third setting is kind of the virtual part of the virtual reality setting for the Future Panic Anski. And also we had Tom Jordan from Interplay, who did a setting for the Wasteland as well. And if you've been on the game, you will have seen those. And they, again, we wanted to give this multimodal experience. So I think teacher in role was the first thing that I kind of wanted to mention. And it was important that we thought about how we could do that together. And we used that in a particular way. We used that to bookend the beginning and the end of each week, if you like, so that when children went into the cave for a week, we'd start with the video, how obviously was in the future and I was in Earth in the cave, but we would use that as a mechanism to suggest that there was this very secret organisation of children called the Story Rebels, and that they would be able to help us to work out what had happened in the past in this cave, what all these objects were, and ultimately they would help to get me back to the future planet. Now we never met up, so this was just a device to position the children. At the end of each week, we were able to look at all of the things the children had put onto the Padlet, and Howell was able then to somehow communicate with me through video, and he would be able to report back that the children had found out certain things in the story. And in that way, I mean, Alistair mentioned, because there wasn't a sense of us being able to directly respond to children. There was a time delay, you know, even on the Padlet, they might be sending messages to each other, but we didn't have that opportunity to be dialogic with them through questioning. So we tried to use at the end of the week those video messages between Howell and I, if you like, as a way to value what children had done in the story through the week. So teacher in role was really used as a device to empower children. The other thing that we did as well is we kind of had, when they came onto the game, they had a secret Story Rebel code and identity, and part of that was we asked them to keep their identity a secret, and that obviously was a safeguarding issue as well. So again, we tried to build these things into the narrative. So I've mentioned teacher in role, and the positioning is really important of the children, because I guess the main thing for the story, for me particularly, was that I wanted, and drawing from a background of drama as a drama practitioner, is this sense that drama is emotion in action for me. And because of lockdown, we wanted initially to create, if you like, an emotional landscape. And that literally is what we did when we first conceived the idea, with the cave, the wasteland, and the future planet. And the idea that the cave would be this dark place, a place of uncertainty, place of discovery, a place of risk-taking possibly, and I would model those emotions. So in some of the teacher in role, initially, some of those videos, I'd say to the children, I'm not scared, but I do need their help to help me to find out what happened in this cave and why I'm there, and so that I don't feel alone. And so they were empowered, but definitely that was the starting point of the story. And so, but we wanted to move from that place, if you like, to the wasteland, which symbolized a place, if you like, perhaps more of literally of desolation. It was really just, there was some things growing there, but it was this place where, again, of uncertainty, where we get the impression, we get a feeling that all definitely was not well. And then Anski became this setting where children could take everything they'd learnt in the wasteland, they could take it back to a new place, a new space, an eco place. And one of the tasks in Anski was to design an eco space or future museum where they would put all of the things that they discovered throughout the story. So this was about, if you like, from a theoretical point of view, about the idea of affirmative ethics. So the idea that, and Rosie Briatore talks about this, that we move in times of difficulty by embracing, we embrace difficulty, we embrace pain, if you like, but we can move through that to a more positive place. And I think hope was something that in this story was more than a feeling, it was a concept. The idea that within the story, there were opportunities for children to make decisions, to change aspects of the story, certainly to help me to move on, or to move back home. And so there was always this idea of embracing uncertainty in the story as hope, as a sense of empowerment, was what we were trying to ultimately create through the story. So the story was a story of, it was an emotional landscape. That's how we pitched it. So that's sort of a little bit about, I wanted to talk about drama as emotion in action, and about the way that was conceived, if you like. I guess the other thing that, in terms of a little bit about the structure, what Mel mentioned, critical questionings, and the other thing that we try to do throughout the story is to litter it with inquiry questions. Things like, what do you notice about the cave? What do you notice about the objects? What do you think happened here? Tell us about, you know, something you've noticed in a particular space. So what do you think happened to this character? So all the time, even though we weren't there to ask the questions, unless you were Jason, the Silver Scholar who was in the game, and Mel, then we were trying to create this to make it as dialogic as it could be. And I think that was a really different way of working for me, particularly as well. And you know, because it felt that there was such a delay to being able to respond. And it, obviously my work as a practitioner is embodied, as is Alistair's. It's aesthetic, and it's about being in the moment. And this was really different. So these felt like structures we were putting in, and it was really interesting for us to think about how the children responded to them. Essentially, we were trying to still create a story experience that was co-created, and in which we could respond with and to the children, but that definitely had a different feeling as an artist practitioner. I don't know if, Alistair, you want to say anything about that?
Not really, because I'm nodding away at everything you're saying here, because yes, you're echoing everything around the issues around discontinuity and the lack of simultaneous engagement. What I didn't say, sorry, I shouldn't say we, what I didn't mention is the feeling of loss of power as an adult and as a practitioner here, and being prepared just to say, I don't have power in this context.
Yeah, brilliant. Mel?
That really speaks to the work I've been doing outside of this project. It's, like I said at the beginning, it's about how as museums, as storytellers, how we can share that power. So that was a really interesting process to watch the grown-ups go through.
Great. Okay, so I mean, we've heard a little bit. I mean, I hope everybody's seen the story who's here. I'm having that. There's Hannah here. I can see a few people. Emma, and it's a small but cozy group, which is great. And I hope you've had a chance to have a look at the story before, or you were at yesterday's session. But what we've heard is kind of a little bit from the artist practitioners. I'd like just to, before we go on and talk about, I'd like to talk about the children's responses. But before that, I'd like to go back to Jason as well as our in disguise. It was also sort of prompting and asking questions, just to hear a bit more from you, because it's fascinating that you had your kind of story rebel hat on as somebody. You also had your teacher hat on, and you had a researcher hat on. So I'm just interested in unpicking that a little bit more for a different perspective. And the first thing I'm just really interested in is how the story made you feel when you were playing. Because this is something we talked about, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing, I can't help myself through sessions like this. Even though I'm a participant now, I still can't help but make notes with comments that are really resonating. You know, even now I think, oh yeah, that's good. So I've been doing that sort of along the way. But to answer your question, I'm looking here thinking some of the words I've written down. So Lisa, so you said emotional landscape, okay, and that's kind of loaded. I mean, I am I'm not going to say I'm a linguist, but I am particularly interested in language choices and vocabulary development, and particularly sort of interested. And that whole idea of emotional landscape, it's kind of like an expression that could trip off the tongue, but when you break it down, you have got this landscape, and you've got different elements, but it's an emotional landscape. And the whole idea of this for me was that I got involved because, I'm a teacher, and I can't help myself. I knew that children would have this experience, and I thought, oh, I could provide online marking and feedback, and it's quicker to type than handwrite, so I thought, oh, that'll be good, and so I was teacher in disguise. Chose a name which I thought didn't sound too childlike, but like silver scholar. So the researcher who's a bit of a sage, I don't know, wise, offer wise support. But really, the really funny thing was the emotion that I felt was excitement. So between the two of you, Lisa, and am I pronouncing it correctly? Is it Howell? Is that how it's Howell? Okay. Between the two of you, it was just so funny because that whole idea where you said it was deliberately not to be polished. Well, for those of us who perhaps were, first watched, if you could bear to, the Blair Witch sort of project, the first movie that was just so rubbish in terms of quality, but it was utterly frightening. And the whole point of this is that, in the same way for me that I find it's really interesting that now that, because everybody's got a phone, actually it's not necessarily about the quality of the shot that it might have been when, like my wife studied photography, so at college, and developed her own pictures and had got all these lenses and stuff. But no, the idea now, so I think about my own children, and I kind of think teenage girls, 17 to 15. Actually, if we've got this amazing kit and these amazing apps, the most important thing is the idea, because we could launch a rocket to the moon, we could make a film of incredible quality, but the idea could be just dull as ditch water and nobody engages. So for me with this here, you could use a phone if you hadn't got a PC. You can take something which is gritty because that's what's been shown to us. So there's this way of saying it doesn't really matter that it's polished. And I've put here, and this is I'm quite proud of this now, because I'm thinking, Lisa, you've helped me to create this. So you were saying it's about thinking outside of the box. And I was thinking, well, do you know what, as a child, the best part of a present for me often was the box. And the whole point of this is we've provided kind of the box to play with. The box can be what you want it to be. Now, we've also put things inside it. There's goodies there. There are art, but actually, the most playful part of it is probably the surprising bit, the box. Maybe annoying for the teacher, maybe annoying for the drama, maybe for the curator, but actually, like you said, the children were not just given a voice. They were given legs to run with it. So they were given the agency to run with it and the emotional landscape to get excited about it. So excitement for me that was a bit of a ramble, but I couldn't help myself. It was exciting, but it was surprising that it was exciting by the fact that it was so simple. But with the drama, what I'll finish off here was, for me, the drama was not, or in role, shall I say, it wasn't like being a lovey. You know, it's like it's a drama and some enunciation. You know, you got this like, you know. I mean, I studied at Sheffield, so so hole in root, for hole in the road. And so you've got this northern, you got this different sound. You've got sort of this, you've got these different voices, different sounds, but you've got the discussions. They were like real. It was like, well, they're not using words to just be sort of dramatic. There were these words I'm kind of thinking, oh my gosh, this could possibly really be happening, because she sounds it, and so that believability, I'll stop there. It was surprising.
I think that's really interesting, because I think what we were aiming for was a sense of living through something online. So I think, and that sort of suspension of disbelief, and that describe yourself feeling that a little bit, which is really interesting. I'm wondering if there's any part of the story for you, as somebody who was immersed in the story, if you like, as a player or a participant, that particularly resonated, that you wanted to reflect on.
Yeah, and I'm not going to pretend that this is just off the, sort of off the top of my head. You asked me to think about this, to reflect about this, and it wasn't hard. It was almost instant when I sort of read that question. I thought, okay. And so for those people, and this will involve sort of Alistair's response to this, perhaps, because this was my take on it, and Alistair might have had an intention, which I'd be interested to hear. But for me, it involved this prop, okay, and we've got here, we've got sort of Alistair, and it says, "I see you found my coat hanger," okay. And what was interesting for me was the fact that here's a prop and something like it that is accessible, and it's probably going to be in the house, and part of me was thinking, is this prop going to become something else? Is it going to be something that I don't know, a weapon, or but Alistair's character, which it says here, a shadow from the past emerges. Okay, he tells this story, and it's like he's talking to you, and he's just telling you. And I thought, oh, do you know what? That kind of sounds like something I could do myself with children. I could probably stand with a prop and say, with the prompts that he's using, like, oh, so they are making some notes, thinking, I thought, actually, I don't have to be dramatic. I can have, so in essence, I'd say is, to watch somebody who's able to take something simple and talk about it in a way that seems accessible for me, I thought, oh, that was kind of empowering. So I wonder what Alice's intention was.
Everything you've just said. I mean, that literally was the what have I got in the house that a child could find in their own home, that could have a story. The story is actually real. It is a true story.
Oh, really?
Yes, apart from the coat hanger bit, but the rest of it is true. Okay. So it was attached, so the coat hanger became the means by which a childhood recollection that traumatized me at the time was shaped. But it's finding tellable moments, and one of the things that as a practitioner and theorist in storytelling is that people think that storytelling is about being theatrical and having you have to do a fairy story and it has to be theatrical, or it has to be a myth or something, whereas actually for me, that storytelling is part of our everyday practice. It is how we represent ourselves in the world, and it is how we read the world. So that we should be able to find, and a tellable moment is what's tellable at that time. A tellable moment when you get home from work is that you got stuck in traffic. That's tellable, because it's tellable for those people. Then for a child, a tellable moment could be that, you know, that they found a snail underneath the desk in the classroom. That's a tellable moment for a child. And celebrating those and finding ways to make those come alive was what I wanted to be able to do. So thank you for what you said. That was very exciting.
Well, that's good. And also what I think is quite good is we've given a little bit of a spoiler, but people would have to really they'd have to look at the site to kind of know what the story really was. So we've been shrewd there by accident.
There is peril involved.
Alison, do you want to just say a little bit about your character as well, and how we positioned, you know, because your character was in the cave, and a little bit about how we kind of tried to thread that narrative loosely into the structure of something you could find in the cave?
And correct me if I get this wrong, Lisa, but a shadow from Earth, so that there was, because it's all about Anski and making this new world, that actually the shadow was a reminder of what the world was before. So in that example, it was a coat hanger, and then in the wasteland, it was an old digital watch on my wrist. Again, picking something that was connected to something that a child could find in the home, but finding significance in it in a tellable moment.
Brilliant. And we mentioned it was an emotional landscape, if you like, but one of the things that we wanted to do through the story is invite children to share their lived experiences, whether that was a watch or the snail under the in the classroom or whatever it was, but also then to move beyond their lived experience, because essentially the story was about a reimagining of somewhere, of a new place. And so I think sort of to finish off with, and then we'll take some questions. You've heard from us in really fragmented ways, but that's what we wanted to do. We wanted this session to just be where we are with the process of this story weave, this online, offline, digital story space. We want to share some of children's thoughts now with you, and how they responded to it. We've talked very much about our own, you know, where we were coming from, if you like, and how it challenged some of our practices. But we're going to talk specifically about one of the settings, which is the cave. And it was very interesting, wasn't it, Alice? Because the cave had, just to put it into context, in case you haven't seen the story, we used Padlet, and we used, within the cave, I have the background here. You would arrive you would go into the story and you would be in the cave. And then there would be that opening video of myself, other video stimulus, perhaps a video of Alistair telling his story as a shadow from the past. There would be objects you could explore, and all the time children would be typing onto the Padlet and responding to and with each other, but as we've said, in a slightly delayed manner, you know, in terms of it would feel quite different to being in the room physically with each other. But the cave itself did have an aesthetic feel. It did have an online emotion scape, if you like. And within the Padlet, we put everything in a very linear way. So once children had been on the Padlet for a week, you had to scroll down loads and loads and loads of text, loads and loads of different responses, loads of videos, and it was quite tiring. You had to scroll down them to get to each day we put a new stimulus on throughout the week in the cave, and you had to scroll down to get to it. And it almost had a feeling of going in and through a cave. And it felt quite dense and heavy with text and images. And we weren't quite sure about whether we liked that design, if you like, in terms of the cave. However, we came across another problem as well, which we'll come to in a minute. But we thought before we do that, we might share with you, in terms of the cave, one of the things that children uploaded. So within the cave, and this is thanks to Vicky Sorko from Chol Theatre, one of our making activities was to design a cave, design a shelter for the night in the cave while children were exploring artifacts, etc. And Vicky put a great video on of herself doing that in role. So she was in role as Annie, and she was with her dog Marv. And we wanted to share, in terms of the way children responded, we wanted to share with you something that a child uploaded.
Cave. It's there. Wow. Look at this place. Turn left. Lava. So cool. Oh look, a beach. Cool. Why is there sand in a cave? Feathers. Vegetation and some water. Something must have lived here. What's that? Loads of feathers. No, what's that? A mask. It must be something must have been wearing it here. What's someone? Look, a fossil. What is that? Look, it's a tree. Look. What else is in here? What's this stuff? It's all bubbly and you can see right through it. This is amazing stuff. Oh look, there's an animal over there. I wonder if it's alive. It probably is. It's probably just so terrified. What was it doing? I can't quite get the camera on. Dog. What's a dog doing here? How does it even survive? Well, it might not, because it's not making noise. Unless it's purring. I can hear purring. What's this? This is some sort of ancient drawing. We've got some of a waterfall. Vegetation is coming out from it. It must be growing from the water.
Great. So we'll just stop there, and this is kind of a good example of an amazing example of some of the responses that children uploaded, and in terms of unpacking that and starting to think about what that tells us about the way children were engaging with the story. Alistair, do you want to sort of kick off in terms of perhaps anything that you know how we've sort of tried to look at the children's ideas and the way they've uploaded them as a way of trying to think about their engagement?
I think there's sorry, I'm just going to change the view here. There, so there's a lot going on there. I mean, what is really nice from my perspective, from my role within the whole thing, was the way that they were making touch with the previous Earth, and they were making those connections, which was really, really lovely. But I think when we're talking about the cave, it's the fact that they're controlling their own environment here. that actually they have this is a space that they have created for themselves. And going back to that whole physicality and embodied, that changes the nature of how they react to each other, to their voices, to the voice of discovery at each moment, and the movement that comes out of that. That's the first time I've seen that video, and that is really, I found really exciting. Really,
yeah, I love the way they've used a mask. It's obviously a mask.
Oh, I actually caught my breath and went when they did that. I really, that was a real moment when I saw that.
So, because some of this is us unpicking, if you like, this is data as well now, I'm thinking about it. And what's clear is that even though we were engaged in the story and we were sort of trying to craft it over the 3 weeks, it's only now when we're looking back over some of the things that children have uploaded that we can see, as Alistair said, that the story, online story, is spilled out into different ways into the home. And we've got another couple of videos, I think, that are just worth watching as well, that that kind of really are very interesting in that way. And they are, well, we'll perhaps talk about them afterwards, but I think that this idea that even though we didn't have control, it was really stimulating children's imagination to move above and beyond the story. So we've got 3 little extracts here as well from children. And again, these are just, these were participants, and these are just their own reflections, completely unprompted by us. And again, it's just interesting to think about, it gives us an insight into the ways that they engaged with the story beyond the online structure that we created.
Back in time. We loved trying to save Lisa on our daily walks. We searched through the forest, woodlands and streams. Every night I'd read other people's comments on the story and video clip. Gave me so many ideas on what I could play with my sisters the next day. We made a cave and spent lots of time drawing on it and making things that we could use to be in our adventures. I still think about the wasteland and the plant Anski when we go to the Lake District on our holidays. The foggy weather and the scenery reminds of me and what the cave could be like.
I liked the crystals I saw. They were quite amazing as they glittered in the sunlight. I would describe it as damp, dark and mysterious. We found mushrooms, those things that hang from the ceiling and those things that poke up from the bottom. We did see the guy with the coat hanger. I thought it was quite amazing that a clothes hanger saved him. Oh yeah, we also saw a jug that I thought was which carried water. Oh, and there was this mysterious object. It was like this dirty blade with numbers on it attached to some sort of wooden stick, which I think might have been some sort of farming tool. They could have cut down wheat or something on any of their crops with it. I think my favourite one was actually building the cave with my sister. I don't think we were the only ones who built it under a table, but I think
a living animal.
Yeah, we put a living animal, we put a little waterfall. Oh yeah, we did use some materials for the water and other stuff.
There was a mysterious noir.
And also on the website there was like this hook that we've seen in Moana. I definitely used it for drawings. And when I was doing one of my head game drawings, I drew a little destroyed temple with a little vase in it. Yeah, I did actually try to sketch some of them and tried to do as much detail as possible. I enjoyed it all.
The most thing I enjoyed was you could hear someone's voice but you couldn't see it. It's the Henry Coates bit.
With the crack?
In the gauge thing on the time machine.
Well, I was on it a lot at first, and then I started to do it a bit more, and gradually I got the hang. I like the bit where you actually made stuff at home. I was quite worried about Lisa. I felt very relieved and excited that she could come back. Well, there was all the objects. I enjoyed seeing how they were all differently made and different shapes. Well, I felt quite excited because everyone was there, so I could talk to them, and also I could write the things down that I felt about it. I enjoyed making the cave. Well, I came up with towels with patterns on them to put as like art in the cave, and to use some blue fabric for a waterfall and green fabric for moths and stuff.
Fantastic. So we get a sense of that just from those extracts, amazing names as well, a real sense of, I listen to that, a real sense of investment, you know, that worry about the character, the teacher in role, essentially my character, that feeling relieved. So we talked about an emotional landscape. A lot of them talked about how they felt, not only about the narrative and the characters in the narrative, but the sense of freedom that they had with kind of, and the detail that they describe in terms of the imaginative objects that they're creating or new settings that they're making, that sense of imaginative freedom and engagement. And I think listening to that, we've talked tonight very much about, as practitioners, you know, feeling that we didn't have that opportunity to question and push and develop the narrative, even though we would normally do it in a fairly unstructured way. But what we get from that, which I think is really interesting, is the way that this imaginative freedom is spilled out into other places, in other spaces outside the story, and actually children really talking about enjoying making offline, which is one of the main focuses of the story at the beginning for COVID, that it would provide that stimulus for children to be able to make offline. So I think that, you know, that's really interesting. I don't know if anybody else has got any other comments.
Right. Can I just say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just in response to that is that see for me, you know, call me old-fashioned, but you know, with I kind of felt that as a teacher and as a father of two teenage girls that are glued to their phones, you know, I was kind of afraid that one of the consequences of this unusual time is that everybody would be pushed in education to be digital. Okay, that was it. You just got to go that way. And for me, what this shows for me is that the blend of, you know, what I'm going to say is the 3D and the 2D, because everything digital, like now, what we're seeing is it's flat, really. You know, even though we're people talking, it's still flat, it's still 2D. But the 2D was a prompt for the 3D, for the concrete, for the living, for the lived experiences. And so the digital, the 2D, provided the stimulus, and even the 2D people provided the stimulus for the children to be 3D, you know, for reality. And for me, that kind of gives me hope that our shrewd children of the future, who become the shrewd adults of the future, will not just blindly go towards things that adults feel that perhaps they ought, that they'll use the tools that they have with the interests that they have in that bricolage way, Alistair. You know, so that gives me hope, you know, and that the idea is more important than the technology. Good ideas is the gold of the future.
I love that. Brilliant, Alistair. Thank you. I love that, Jason.
I thought it was fascinating when I'm not sure how the Cumbrian Tourist Authority would feel about this, that the Lake District reminded them of the wasteland. But the wasteland itself, they placed that external to their living space. They placed it somewhere outside. And in lockdown, of course, the ability to embody that was limited. Whereas the cave you could embody in the space in the home, it was much harder to embody the wasteland outside when you were restricted in that sense. And I wonder if that's part of why we ended up in the cave for so long. I also think one of the other side of, not the other side, but another aspect of it is the fragmentary narratives do not reconcile, and there is no resolution in the fragmentary narratives. So why do you need to finish? Why do you need to end if there hasn't been a resolution? Until you get bored of it, there is no compunction to move on to something else when the narratives themselves are fragmentary. And that's not a criticism. It's just a looking at how the children responded.
And that's probably a really good place to sort of finish just before we take some questions, thinking about the cave, Alistair, because you're absolutely right. We did have this, we did have a conundrum, I guess, as a group of artists. We'd created the cave, the wasteland, and the future world. And you've got the amazing picture behind by the artist of the future Anski. And we were really excited about this last world because it was where they would bring all of the knowledge from the wasteland. They were going to design a future eco museum. We had some wonderful, wonderful stimulus. And we thought that the numbers for the story had just dropped off because people weren't on the Padlet for the wasteland, and they weren't on the Padlet particularly for Anski. And we were a little bit, I guess we were perhaps a little bit disappointed, but also because we felt it was so rich. But actually, when we looked at it, we discovered something different, didn't we?
Yeah, because they loved the cave. That it was such a rich place to stimulate the imagination. And it's a place that you can, as I say, that you can embody in your under the table, exactly as the child said. You know, he said, I think other people made their caves under the table as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's what we found, that we couldn't work out. We thought the numbers had dropped off, but then we went back. Children were going back on the Padlet for the cave in week 2 and week 3, and they were going back in there, and we could see them in there, but we just couldn't move them out of there. We couldn't move the narrative on. And I think I then like to sort of go back to where I started, perhaps with the kind of conception of the story, of this idea of an emotional landscape at a time when we could think about sort of hopeful futures. And someone said to me recently, well, of course the children didn't come out of the cave because we're all still in the cave, and the cave is a safe place. And I hadn't really particularly thought about that, but it made sense. So I guess moving forward, we've still got the wasteland and we've still got Anski to explore. We've got all of those stimulus, but that is a really interesting, from a research perspective as well, a really interesting way, in the way that the children didn't want to move on. And so there was this sense of freedom, and we had no control over that. So they just kept going on that cave Padlet and didn't want to explore the rest of the story. So that's probably a good place to finish. I'd like just to thank everybody listening. I think I can see we've got Hannah, we've got Emma. I think that's it. We've recorded today. We've seen this as kind of a live, inquiry. We've just unpacked some of the stuff to do with the story. And I'd like to thank you so much for listening. We've jumped all over the place, but that was the design of the session, that we just wanted to kind of unpack it a bit. So I don't know if you've got any questions or any comments at all.
I think it's been really interesting. You've inspired one of my children who stood at the side listening when you were talking about the box, the cardboard box. So he ran upstairs and he said, I know where there's a box, and he came back down. So he's gone to bed now, but tomorrow we've got a plan. We're going to make something with the box. So that was quite nice. So he joined in for a little while there in the middle.
Brilliant. Have you had a go at the story, Hannah? Just because otherwise it would seem we're jumping around a bit. So you're familiar with it. Yeah. To these reflections.
Yeah. So I went into it a little bit, and not my son that you saw today, but my older son also had a look at it during lockdown as well when he was at home. So we have had a look on there as well. Yeah. And
any sort of thoughts from that?
I think he really was quite inspired by it, because during the lockdown period, it's hard to get, interested in new things, and he quite likes being on technology and exploring things online. So it kind of sparked a little bit of creativity. Did some writing as well over that period. So it was good. It was inspiring.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thanks, Hannah. I know I could see Emma had a question as well. Sorry, Emma, I didn't see your hand up.
Hi. Sorry, I've got loads of questions for you, I'm afraid. I might be better to come back to email them or something. There's so many. Firstly, I'm glad that you're safe. What a relief. So I could relate to that. When the kids were, I thought, yeah, I can see how they would relate to that. Oh, there's so many things. It's so exciting. The curiosity I thought was interesting. Watching those videos, I had that moment when I saw the face covering, and I was like, oh, it was really moving, because I think everyone in the world has had this experience in some shape or form, but when you see the children, how this has given them that kind of platform to explore and be curious, I think that's just really moving. So many things. Just as a practitioner, as a novice practitioner, I'm just looking at this and thinking, wow, you could do this, you could do that, or how, and I have been wondering, I've read some books, and I was wondering, how does that look? How is that enacted? How is that embodied? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And I think this is it. This is showing what it kind of looks like and what it sounds like, and it's amazing. So well done to everybody. It was really amazing project. And sorry, when can we read more about it? What are you going to?
Yeah, there is a blog, which was an initial blog, and then and that I'll release again, but we will be doing some writing about it, in terms of that we're in the middle of, there was a research paper from it and developing it further. So we'll definitely be posting that out through Storymakers, through the on social media, and sharing any other things. We'll definitely be writing and unpacking it. This is the first of us starting to unpack it, really. I think, and we were excited to use this platform to start to unpack it as a team, really. And that's why, in the same way, this conversation has been very fragmented as well, but that was what we wanted to do, really. So I think our next step then is to go away and think about, thinking about some of the themes that have come up tonight, and writing about it. I'd love to hear about how you use it as well, Emma. You're muted, but I'd love to hear about how you use it. You're saying there's so many other different directions as well, if you use it in your class.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to seeing that on social media, and I'll let you know. I don't think I'll be able to maybe use it on this placement. I'm in secondary on this placement, but it's kind of difficult trying to all the restrictions and things. It's kind of limiting what you can do, but I'm really excited to try it.
Excellent.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, keep in touch, and we'll be doing more similar things. Some of them may be more sort of secondary focused, but if you do try it out in the secondary and get the opportunity, we'd really love to hear about the ways that they engage with it.
Yeah, I think a lot of them would, because you know, I think people think secondary is so different, and I think they're all just children, really. At the end of the day, they're just bigger bodied children. So I think there's loads of opportunity there for doing that. Yeah.
Alistair, you're muted.
It's not allowing me to do my thing. I just wanted to say, aren't we all just bigger bodied children? I'm afraid. I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah. Yes, we are. Yeah.
And brilliant, and that's probably a great place to finish. So thank you. So I'd like to thank everybody, all the artists here this evening, and our audience for coming along for us to start to unpack it, all of the things. I'd also like to thank Anna as well for being in the background doing all sorts of wonderful things. So thank you very much, Anna. And I'd like to thank also the Being Human Festival for allowing us to share this critical reflection, starting to unpack our Reimagining Home story this evening. So do, if you're interested, follow us on Storymakers. Do get in touch. We've got in the chat there, we've got our website, we're on Twitter as well. And thank you again.